Alaska, 2004. 12 elite soldiers. One impossible hunt. A creature they called gugway. I watched my brothers die, one by one, in a nightmare colder than the ice. They called it an accident. I know the truth, and it still hunts me every night. Are you ready to hear it? I don't talk about this because I want to. I talk because it hunts me every night, in dreams and in silence. The cold gets into your bones up there, a deep, pervasive chill that no fire can fully banish. But the kind of cold I'm talking about, that's not just the Alaskan winter. That's the kind of cold that crawls into your soul and freezes a part of you solid, forever. That's the cold of knowing what's out there. It was 2004. Afghanistan was a raw wound, Iraq a fresh one. We were a unit of 12 men, not just soldiers, but ghosts of different campaigns, shadows carrying scars you couldn't see. Special forces, the kind of guys who'd seen things that would break most people. We called ourselves the Wolverines, a grim joke for a grim job. Our official deployment papers, the ones the suits filed back in DC, read like a boilerplate, extreme Arctic weather training exercise. Bullshit. We all knew it the moment our C-130 touched down on that makeshift strip near some godforsaken, unnamed settlement in the Alaskan interior. Nobody sends 12 combat-hardened veterans to practice in a place where the wind howls like a banshee trying to tear your face off and the snow doesn't fall. It lashes you like icy whips. The air itself felt alive, thick with an unspoken dread. The silence after the roar of the plane was deafening, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak of the ice, every beat of your own heart. It was a silence so heavy, it felt like any sudden noise would be a scream. That first day, the sky the color of bruised plums, Captain Thorne called us together. Thorne was a man carved from granite, all sharp angles and cold, calculating eyes. He didn't waste time with pleasantries or protocol. No official papers, no PowerPoint slides, just us, huddled around a sputtering propane heater inside a cramped military tent, our breath fogging in the frigid air. He looked at each of us, his gaze lingering, dissecting. I remember seeing my own reflection, distorted and grim, in the lens of his unflinching stare. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice flat, emotionless, cutting through the tense hum. "The official story is training. The real story, we're here to hunt." A ripple went through the men. A few exchanged glances, a subtle tightening of jaws. We'd hunted men before, hunted terror, hunted the shadows. This felt different. "The target," Thorne continued, "is not human. It's not Russian. And it's damn sure not any animal you'll find in a wildlife documentary. It's something else." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching us absorb the impossible. This something has claimed over 30 lives in this region, unaccounted for, disappeared. The reports are buried, redacted, or just plain vanish. But the folks who live out here, the ones who whisper about it in hushed tones around their fires, they call it GUGWE. The name hit us like a blast of Arctic wind, even though it was completely foreign. GUGWE. It sounded like a curse, a guttural rasp ripped from the throat of something ancient and terrible. I saw the flicker in the eyes of my comrades, a mix of incredulity warring with a primal, dawning fear. Dave "Doc" Miller, our medic, usually a rock, cleared his throat, but no words came. Sam "Ghost" Garcia, our recon expert, usually quick with a sarcastic quip, just stared at Thorne, his face pale. It was a name none of us had ever heard, but in Thorne's voice it held the weight of a death sentence. We were no longer just soldiers. We were pawns in a game we didn't understand, pushed onto a board with an opponent who defied every rule of engagement we knew. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a horror story unfolding, and we were the unwilling protagonists. The unspoken question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. What exactly is this gugwe, and what kind of nightmare had the brass sent us to face? We were hunters, yes, but the way Thorne had spoken, the look in his eyes, it made me wonder if we were truly the ones doing the hunting. Maybe, just maybe, the roles were already reversed. The next morning broke gray and unforgiving, a mirror to the mood settling over our unit. The previous night's briefing had stripped away any pretense of normalcy, replacing it with a grim, unspoken understanding. We packed our gear, each movement deliberate, heavy with the weight of Thorne's words. The GUGWE. The name was still a bitter taste on my tongue, a constant hum of dread beneath the roar of the wind. We moved out, a tight formation of 12 men against the vast, indifferent expanse of the Alaskan wilderness. Snow crunched under our boots, an unnerving symphony in the deafening silence. The cold was a physical presence, gnawing at exposed skin, a constant reminder of our vulnerability. Our mission, as Thorne had laid it out, was simple. Track it, observe it, confirm it. Only then, and only if absolutely necessary, were we to engage. His emphasis on observe had been particularly unsettling. It didn't take long to find something. We'd been slogging through a dense patch of stunted pines, their branches skeletal and frosted, when Miller, who was up front with Thorne, stopped dead. He raised a gloved hand, signaling caution. We fanned out, rifles raised, senses on high alert. Thorne knelt, his profile a study in stone, and pointed. There, pressed into the pristine canvas of freshly fallen snow, were tracks, and they were monstrous. "Holy hell," Chris Maverick Brooks muttered, his voice barely a whisper, echoing the thought in all our minds. These weren't bear tracks. No grizzly, no polar bear, no known predator left a print like this. They were enormous, easily 2, maybe 3 times the size of my own boot, which was a size 12. The shape was vaguely humanoid, but distorted, elongated, with distinct, terrifyingly long claw marks gouged deep into the frozen earth beneath the snow. It wasn't just the width, but the depth. Whatever left these prints had to weigh a ton, maybe more. Each step was a profound crater, as if an invisible, colossal hammer had struck the ground. "Look at this," Sam Garcia said, tracing a finger over one of the impressions. "The toes. They're too long, too spread, like someone dragged blades through the ice." He was right. The claws were not retracting, they were permanent, leaving deep, sharp scores that could gut a man like a fish. The sheer force required to leave such an impression was staggering. My breath hitched. The captain's words about not an animal echoed in my head. This was tangible proof. This was real. And it was terrifying. The tracks weren't just big. They were alien, unnatural. They whispered of something that shouldn't exist, something that defied biology and sanity. We followed them, hour after grueling hour, our initial shock giving way to a grim, focused determination. The tracks led us deeper into a labyrinth of snow-covered ridges and valleys, the landscape becoming more oppressive, the silence more profound. Every rustle of frozen branches, every groan of shifting ice made us flinch. We were no longer just tracking. We were being pulled into a dark current, a destination unknown but undoubtedly deadly. The cold gnawed at us, but it was the cold of creeping fear that truly seeped into our bones. The sun, a sickly orange disk, began its long, slow descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood reds. The tracks kept going, relentless, unhurried, as if the creature knew exactly where it was going, and perhaps that we would follow. Then, just as the last sliver of light vanished behind a jagged mountain peak, the track stopped, abruptly, not gradually fading, not obscured by wind or snow, but ending in the middle of a vast, open expanse of untouched powder. It was as if the immense creature had simply lifted itself into the air, or vanished into thin air, leaving no trace, no scuff, nothing. We fanned out, searching, our flashlights cutting desperate cones through the encroaching gloom. Nothing. The pristine snow stretched out an empty, mocking canvas. The air thickened with a sudden, unnerving stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had it disappeared, or was it just watching? Somewhere in the vast, silent, and increasingly menacing darkness around us, I knew, with a horrifying certainty that it was still out there, and it knew we were here. That night, the first in the operational zone, the silence was no longer merely profound. It was a living, breathing entity, pressing in on us, amplifying every strained nerve and every beat of our terrified hearts. We'd set up a rudimentary camp, a few tents pitched close together, trying to ward off the soul-sucking cold and the creeping dread. No fires, not a chance. Our presence needed to be as minimal as possible, a futile hope against something that seemed to defy detection. I was on first watch, paired with Martinez and Snake Johnson, a quiet, wiry guy from Tennessee who'd seen too much desert sun. We were positioned on a rocky outcrop overlooking a small, frozen creek bed, our night vision goggles strapped on, rifles at the ready. The world through the green lens was an ethereal, unsettling landscape of glowing snow and dark, ominous shapes of pines. The air was so still, so cold it hurt to breathe. The hours dragged on, each minute an eternity. The wind, which had been a constant companion, died down to a faint whisper, leaving an even deeper quiet. We spoke only in clipped, hushed tones, our words swallowed by the vastness. Martinez, usually stoic, kept shifting his weight, his eyes darting through the night vision, a nervous energy radiating off him. Johnson was a statue, but I could feel the tension humming off him too. We all felt it, that sickening, constant sense of being observed, of not being alone. Then, around 2 in the morning, it hit us. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a smell. And it was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Something so profoundly wrong and viscerally repulsive that it made my stomach lurch. Not just dead animal. This was deeper, fouler, a stench that scraped at the back of your throat and made your eyes water. It was the smell of rotting meat, thick and cloying, but mingled with something else, something metallic, like rusted iron, and a cloying, sickly sweetness, like decay itself had found a voice. It was dense, pervasive, as if it was being pumped directly into the air around us. Jesus Christ, Martinez choked out, gagging, pulling his scarf higher over his mouth and nose, though I knew it was useless. The smell was already in our lungs, in our very being. You smell that, Mac? Johnson's voice was a ragged whisper, strained with disgust and fear. I could only nod, fighting back the urge to vomit. It wasn't just a smell. It was a presence heavy and suffocating, a declaration of something unspeakable. It permeated the cold air, clinging to our clothes, our skin, our very souls. It was a warning, a territorial marker, or maybe just the natural odor of something truly alien and grotesque. We scanned the darkness, our rifles trembling slightly in our gloved hands. Through the green haze of night vision, the frost-blackened trees looked like skeletal fingers reaching from a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to writhe, to hold a hidden threat. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. And then, I saw it, or thought I saw it, a flicker of movement, faint, almost imperceptible, deep among the trees, maybe 200 yards out. It was too fast, too fleeting to properly register, but it was there. A shadow that seemed to solidify for a split second, then dissipate, blending seamlessly back into the oppressive gloom. It wasn't fluid like an animal, not erratic like wind through branches. It was deliberate, calculated. Martinez saw it too. He whispered, "Did you see that?" Johnson tightened his grip on his rifle, his knuckles white. "Yeah, barely." We stayed absolutely still, straining our eyes, our ears, every nerve ending screaming. The stench was almost overwhelming now, a suffocating blanket. The trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets we didn't want to hear. And then, a sound. So soft, so low, I almost convinced myself it was just the wind, or the blood rushing in my ears. A guttural exhalation, a deep, raspy whisper of a breath, right there. Not from the trees, not from the distant darkness, but close. So close it seemed to brush past my ear, chilling me to the bone, raising every hair on my neck. It was an inhuman sound, ancient and predatory, as if the creature itself was breathing down our necks. a silent, unseen menace in the suffocating darkness. The whispered breath, almost a growl, had stolen our voices, leaving us paralyzed in the suffocating stench. Our night vision goggles suddenly felt like blinders, revealing only a monochromatic world that hid more than it showed. Our training kicked in, a desperate attempt to override the primal terror. We spread out slowly, silently, moving from our outcrop, rifles tracking, trying to pinpoint the source of that terrifying exhalation. Every crunch of snow under our boots felt like a thunderclap. The movement in the trees became more distinct, less fleeting. A shape, tall and gangly, began to coalesce, slowly, deliberately, as if it wanted us to see it, to fully comprehend the nightmare that was unfolding. My blood ran cold, a glacial current in my veins. This wasn't an animal sneaking up on its prey. This was a reveal. It stepped out from behind a cluster of pines, into a slightly more open clearing, framed against the faint, shimmering aurora borealis that had begun to dance across the sky. And the world tilted. It was colossal, easily 8 or 9 feet tall, maybe more, standing with a stooped, almost hunched posture. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in what looked like massive clawed hands. The body was lean, almost gaunt, but with an underlying sinewy power that vibrated through the air. This was no bear. Bears were hulking, shaggy, familiar. This was wrong. Its head was large, disproportionate to its slender neck. It had a short, almost flattened snout, not like a wolf or a bear, but something vaguely simian, yet far more savage. The jaw was immense, clearly capable of incredible force, its outline hinting at rows of jagged teeth. Its entire body was covered in matted, dirty fur, clotted with what looked like dried blood and bits of flesh, as if it had recently devoured something and simply collected the remnants on its own hide. It was grotesque, a walking abomination, a living nightmare crafted from raw, primal fear. But it was the eyes that truly froze my soul. They were large, set deep, and glowed with an eerie, predatory yellow light, like dying embers in a forge. They weren't reflective like an animal's eyes in the dark. They pulsed with an internal, malevolent energy. And they were fixed on us, unblinking, intelligent. They were the eyes of something that thought, that understood, that hunted. What the hell is that? Johnson stammered, his voice laced with pure, unadulterated terror. He raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking so violently I could hear the subtle clatter of metal. Martinez, usually so composed, looked utterly broken. His mouth hung slightly open, a silent scream frozen on his face. He was paralyzed, caught in the creature's gaze. I felt it too, that paralyzing fear. Every instinct screamed at me to open fire, to unleash hell on this monstrosity. But Thorne's order echoed in my mind. Observe first, observe this nightmare. My finger hovered over the trigger, an internal battle raging. My heart was a drum machine gone wild. The smell, that putrid metallic stench, was almost suffocating now, intensifying with the creature's presence. The gugway took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. Its gait was odd, almost lurching, but filled with an incredible power that belied its seemingly awkward movement. It wasn't a stalk, not a cautious approach. It was a casual stroll, as if it knew we were incapable of stopping it. The yellow eyes never left us. They seemed to pierce through the night vision, through my very skull, into the deepest parts of my consciousness, finding every hidden fear, every suppressed memory of terror. Martinez, his breath coming in ragged gasps, suddenly let out a strangled cry. The creature's eyes, those horrible, burning yellow orbs, seemed to lock onto him with an almost palpable intensity, a predatory intelligence that spoke of ancient hunger. He couldn't take it. The sight, the smell, the sheer, unimaginable wrongness of it all. His face contorted, a mask of pure terror and desperation. His training, his discipline, his sanity, it all cracked. I saw the desperate clench of his jaw, the white knuckles around his weapon. The unholy tension of the moment snapped, a tightrope stretched too far. I knew what was coming. I saw the wild, frantic look in his eyes, a desperate plea for an end to the nightmare. He was breaking. The silence was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket woven from dread and the monster's predatory gaze. Then, it shattered. Martinez, his face a contorted mask of pure primal terror, squeezed his trigger. 3 frantic bursts ripped through the frigid air, the sharp crack of his M4 echoing violently across the desolate landscape. The muzzle flashes briefly illuminated the nightmare creature, painting it in stark, terrifying relief against the dark pines, a grotesque tableau of pure horror. The gugway reacted with a speed that defied its immense size. One moment, it was standing there, its yellow eyes burning into Martinez. The next, it was a blur, a dark, impossibly fast streak, vanishing behind the trees just as Martinez's rounds chewed harmlessly into the snow where it had stood. It moved with an unnatural grace, a terrifying efficiency that suggested millennia of hunting. "Martinez, cease fire!" Thorne's voice, usually a cold command, was now edged with a raw urgency, but it was too late. A split second later, the world itself seemed to erupt. A roar, unlike anything I have ever heard, tore through the night. It wasn't the roar of a bear nor the scream of a lion. It was deeper, more guttural, a sound ripped from the very bowels of the earth, vibrating with ancient, untamed fury. It pulsed through my chest, a physical blow that knocked the wind out of me, rattling my teeth, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. It resonated with such force it felt like my eardrums would burst. It was a sound that spoke of pure, unadulterated rage, of immense destructive power. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the roar. It was absolute, suffocating, pregnant with an unspoken horror. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of our own breathing, the frantic pounding of our hearts. My night vision goggles cast a sickly green glow over the desolate scene, but I couldn't see the creature. It was gone, vanished. The air still vibrated with the residual echo of its monstrous fury, and the putrid stench intensified, a constant reminder of its presence. We stayed frozen, weapons raised, eyes frantically scanning the darkness. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of the wind sounded like approaching footsteps. The adrenaline coursed through me, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. We had broken the cardinal rule. We had engaged without command, and now we were plunged into the deepest part of the nightmare. Martinez, who had initiated the shots, was nowhere to be seen, swallowed by the darkness. The rest of the night was an agonizing vigil. No one slept. No one dared. We huddled together, backs to each other, listening, straining, every nerve screaming. The cold was secondary now, a mere inconvenience compared to the creeping dread that clutched at our throats. When the first pale, bruised light of dawn finally broke through the perpetual twilight of the Alaskan winter, it brought no comfort, only more horror. We found Martinez, or what was left of him. Not far from where he had fired, a mere 30 yards from our position, lay the evidence of the gugway's brutal efficiency. There was no body, not in any recognizable form, just scattered bone fragments, splintered and gnawed, amidst a gruesome splatter of dark, viscous stains on the otherwise pristine snow. It wasn't blood as we knew it. It was thicker, almost black, congealed and glistening sickly in the meager light. It looked like ancient oil or tar, mixed with the pulverized remains of a man. A torn piece of his combat jacket, still bearing his unit patch, was impaled on a jagged tree branch, like a macabre flag. Captain Thorne walked slowly toward the scene, his face a mask of stone, utterly devoid of emotion. He knelt, examined the gruesome tableau for a long moment, then stood. His gaze swept over us, each man visibly shaking, eyes wide with a horror that defied words. "Move out," he ordered, his voice flat, emotionless, devoid of ceremony. "No burial, no time, we follow the tracks." His words struck us with the force of a physical blow. No burial? No last rites for a fallen comrade? It was an insult, a desecration. But more than that, it was a chilling declaration. Martinez was not a casualty of war, nor an accident. He was simply gone, erased. And we were nothing more than instruments, disposable assets in a hunt that had just turned far more deadly. The message was clear. There was no time for grief, no quarter given in this nightmare. We were not just tracking the GUGWE, it was actively hunting us, and Martinez was merely the first to fall. The dread deepened, a cold, suffocating weight. We were walking a tightrope over an abyss, and the monster was waiting below. The death of Martinez, swift and brutally efficient, stripped away the last vestiges of our professional detachment. We were no longer special forces operators on a mission. We were just men, utterly terrified, being hunted. Captain Thorne's callous disregard for Martinez's remains had hammered home the chilling reality. In this frozen hell, we were expendable. Our lives were secondary to the mission, and the mission now felt like a suicide pact. Days blurred into a relentless grind of paranoia and bone-deep exhaustion. The sun, when it bothered to show its face, offered no warmth, no comfort. The landscape, once merely harsh, now felt overtly hostile. Every shadow a potential ambush, every distant peak a watchful eye. The tracks of the GUGWE were still there, impossibly deep, impossibly long, leading us ever onward into its territory. But now, they weren't just a trail to follow. They were a looming threat, a reminder that we were walking a path laid out for us, not by us. Sleep became a luxury we couldn't afford. We snatched an hour here, an hour there, restless, haunted by the stench that seemed to cling to our gear, and the image of those glowing yellow eyes. Night watches were agonizing vigils, our fingers perpetually hovering over triggers, every sound magnified, every gust of wind a potential attack. My comrades, hardened veterans all, began to show the strain. Dave Miller, our medic, usually unflappable, had a constant tremor in his hands. Sam Garcia, our usually jovial recon man, walked with a haunted look, his eyes darting frantically. Even Thorne, though his face remained a mask, had a tighter set to his jaw, a more pronounced tension in his shoulders. We were all broken, just in different ways. The night noises escalated, becoming bolder, more audacious. It started subtle, the inexplicable rustling of branches too heavy for the wind, the faint crunch of snow from beyond our perimeter that vanished the moment we focused on it. Then it grew. Low, guttural growls, barely audible, would seem to emanate from all directions at once, circling our camp like a phantom predator, taunting us. Heavy breathing, raspy and deep, would suddenly seem to materialize right outside our tents, close enough to send shivers down your spine, only to fade into the endless silence. It wasn't just physical exhaustion that gnawed at us. It was the psychological warfare, the constant, invisible pressure. One afternoon, Jensen, our demolitions expert, let out a startled cry. He was inspecting a cluster of ancient spruce trees near a narrow pass we were traversing, looking for potential ambush points. He pointed, his hand shaking. On the smooth, hardened bark of several towering trees high above the snow line were bizarre, deep gouges. Not axe marks, not bear claw marks. These were long, curving gashes, as if immense, razor-sharp talons had raked effortlessly through the thick wood. Some were easily 10 feet off the ground, far too high for any known animal to reach. They looked like giant claw marks, left deliberately, casually, as a message. "It's marking its territory," Chris Brooks whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "No," I corrected, a cold dread seizing me. "It's showing us it's been here. It's letting us know it's watching." The realization hit us with the force of a physical blow. We weren't just tracking a monster. We were being stalked. We were the prey, led deeper into its domain, every step confirming its mastery over this brutal land. The GUGWE wasn't just a beast. It was an intelligent hunter, playing with us, herding us, enjoying the fear it instilled. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. We are being hunted. Later that day, as the sun began its swift descent, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple, a fleeting shadow, immense and dark, passed over our camp perimeter. It was gone in an instant, too quick to identify, too substantial to be a trick of the light or a bird. But we all saw it, a dark, impossibly fast streak against the dying light. It was unmistakable, undeniable. The creature was no longer just whispering in the darkness. It was bold, it was close, and the hunt had escalated. The shadow, gone as quickly as it appeared, solidified our worst fears. The gugway was not merely stalking us from a distance. It was circling, closing in, like a wolf pack slowly tightening its noose around a cornered deer. Our once hardened unit, now a collection of gaunt, hollow-eyed men, moved with a desperation bordering on panic. Every rustle was a threat, every distant sound a warning. The constant psychological torture was fraying our nerves, wearing down our resolve. Captain Thorne, however, seemed to thrive on the tension, or at least he allowed no crack in his stone-cold exterior. He drove us relentlessly, pushing deeper into a region that felt increasingly alien and malevolent. The trees grew sparser, giving way to a more desolate, rocky terrain, riddled with narrow passages and towering, jagged peaks. The wind howled through these canyons like a banshee, carrying with it the faint but ever-present stench of decay. We reached a particularly desolate valley, a chasm carved into the earth by ancient glaciers, its walls rising precipitously, dark and imposing. The floor was a winding, treacherous path of ice and snow, barely wide enough for a single file. Thorne stopped at its entrance, his eyes scanning the looming cliffs. "This is it," he announced, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic grim finality. "This is where we corner it." He gestured to the surrounding rock faces. "We'll set charges along the ridge lines, trigger them to collapse the exits, bottle it up. Then we go in." A knot tightened in my gut. Corner it? It felt more like we were being led into a slaughterhouse. This valley wasn't a trap for the gugway. It was a trap for us. The captain's plan, audacious as it was, felt less like strategy and more like desperation. My instincts, honed over years of combat, screamed wrong. Every fiber of my being recoiled from the idea of entering that maw. The valley walls loomed like giant broken teeth, promising nothing but containment and a brutal end. "Captain," Sergeant Brooks ventured cautiously, his voice strained, "this looks like a textbook kill zone. We'd be boxed in." Thorne turned, his gaze like ice. "That's the point, Sergeant. We force its hand. We bring the fight to it, on our terms." But his terms felt like suicide. The air in the valley was thick with an almost palpable tension, a static hum of impending violence. The vastness of the wilderness seemed to shrink, replaced by the suffocating enclosure of the valley. We moved in, a line of ghosts against the unforgiving rock and snow. Jensen, our demolitions expert, started scouting positions for the C4, his face etched with grim resignation. The rest of us set up defensive positions, scanning the ridges, our rifles feeling like fragile toys against the unimaginable power we knew lurked somewhere in this place. Every click of the safety, every adjustment of a glove sounded unnaturally loud. The cold had ceased to register as pain. It was just a part of the oppressive atmosphere, a harbinger of something worse. As Jensen began arming the first set of charges, a low, guttural growl echoed through the valley. It wasn't distant. It wasn't faint. It was right there. It seemed to emanate from directly above us, reverberating off the rock walls, shaking the snow from the ledges. It was deep, throaty, a sound of ancient malevolence, yet laced with an unnerving, almost knowing amusement. My blood froze in my veins. My head snapped up, my eyes sweeping the towering cliff faces, but I saw nothing. The sound was everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied voice from hell itself. The gugway wasn't just aware of our plan. It had anticipated it. It had been waiting. It had lured us here. We weren't the hunters. We were trapped. The valley was not a containment zone. It was a grave, and we had just walked into it. The growl from above was a death knell, echoing off the valley walls and chilling us to the bone. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. The gugway knew. It had been waiting, and now we were cornered. Before anyone could react, before Thorn could even bark an order, a monstrous shape detached itself from the rocky precipice high above us. It wasn't a fall, it was a leap, a controlled, impossibly powerful descent. The creature hit the snow-covered ground with a concussive thud that shook the earth, a cloud of snow erupting around its terrifying form. It was immense, a towering nightmare, and it moved with a speed that defied physics. In the space of a heartbeat, it covered the 20 yards between the cliffs and our position. Dave Miller, our medic, and Chris Brooks, who were closest to the point of impact, barely had time to register what was happening. Miller had his rifle half raised, his face frozen in a scream of terror. Brooks, ever the first to react, was trying to pivot, but it was too late. The gugway was a blur of matted fur and razor-sharp claws. It moved like a vengeful spirit, a whirlwind of muscle and bone. One enormous clawed hand swiped at Miller, tearing through his combat gear as if it were tissue paper. I heard a wet, sickening ripping sound, followed by Miller's brief, agonizing shriek, cut abruptly short as he was flung against the rock wall like a rag doll. His body crumpled, lifeless. Before his body even hit the ground, the creature spun, its yellow eyes blazing with primal fury, and descended upon Brooks. Brooks managed to get a single shot off, a desperate, futile pop against the overwhelming force, before the gugwe's powerful jaws clamped down on his torso. A grotesque, sickening crunch echoed through the valley, and Brooks's scream became a gurgling gasp, then silence. The creature shook him once violently and then dropped him, a broken, bloody mess on the pristine snow. Chaos erupted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated terror. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of desperate shouts, the frantic clatter of weapons and the primal roar of the monster. "Open fire! Open fire!" Thorn bellowed, his voice raw, finally shattering his usual composure. We unleashed everything we had. Rifles spat fire, tracer rounds streaking through the twilight, hammering against the creature. The rounds seemed to have little effect, barely making it flinch, just irritating it, infuriating it further. We adjusted our aim, going for headshots, for the eyes, anything to stop the unstoppable. But it moved too fast, a dark, weaving silhouette against the falling snow, seemingly impervious to our assault. "Grenades! Grenades!" Sam Garcia yelled, pulling a frag from his vest. I followed suit, fumbling with the pin, my hands trembling uncontrollably. We lobbed them, hoping the concussive force, if not the shrapnel, would slow it down. The explosions ripped through the air, sending shards of rock and snow flying. But when the smoke cleared, the gugwe was still standing, still moving, still a terrifying force of nature. Jensen, our demolitions expert, had dropped his C4 and retrieved his flamethrower from his pack, a desperate last resort. He aimed, a grim resolve on his face, and unleashed a torrent of fire. A gush of liquid flame erupted, painting a terrifying arc through the darkening air. The fire slammed into the gugwe, engulfing it in an inferno. The heat was immense, washing over us even from a distance. The creature roared again, a sound of agony and pure, unholy hatred. But it didn't fall. The flames danced around its grotesque silhouette, briefly illuminating its form in horrifying detail. Twisted muscles bunched and writhed under its matted, burning fur. Its frame was all angles and raw power, an unholy sculpture of primal savagery. And then through the flickering inferno, through the smoke and the chaos, I saw it. Its head, already a nightmare, seemed to twist, its powerful jaws slick with the blood of our comrades stretched wide. And for a horrifying, impossible second, amidst the inferno and the roar of battle, I swear I saw its mouth stretch into a wide, malevolent smile. A gesture of pure, inhuman malice, a triumphant grin that spoke of ancient evil, of a hunter relishing its prey. It wasn't just a beast, it was a demon, and it was enjoying our terror. The smile, a grotesque contortion on that monstrous face, was burned into my mind, a chilling testament to the creature's malevolence. It wasn't just killing us, it was reveling in it, The flamethrower's fire continued to engulf the gugway, painting it in terrifying, infernal light. The roaring was incessant now, a blend of the monster's fury and the desperate cries of my falling comrades. The air was thick with the stench of burning fur, scorched flesh, and that familiar, sickly sweet odor of decay. We kept firing, a desperate, dwindling few. Thorne, Garcia, Johnson and I, along with Walters and Anderson, were the only ones left standing, a scattered, desperate line against an unyielding nightmare. Our magazines were running dry, our grenades spent. We were fighting with pure animalistic instinct now, stripped of all discipline save the will to survive. The creature staggered briefly. The flames were taking their toll. We saw its skin where the fur had burned away, exposed patches of dark, leathery hide, sizzling and smoking. And then we saw the wounds. Round after round, grenade after grenade, had finally found purchase. Dark, gaping holes appeared in its flesh, not bleeding bright red. Instead, a thick, viscous liquid, almost black, oozed from its wounds. It sizzled and steamed as it hit the snow, melting small craters like acid or some unholy chemical. It wasn't blood. It was something else, something alien and repulsive, crackling like static electricity as it touched the frozen earth. "It's hit! Keep firing! Don't stop!" Thorne roared, his voice hoarse, emptying a full clip into the creature's chest, aiming for the gaping holes. We emptied our weapons. Shotguns blasted, tearing more chunks from its hide. But even as it bled that thick black ichor, even as it staggered, it didn't fall. It didn't even slow down. Instead, it let out a shriek that ripped through the valley, a sound of renewed, terrifying fury, and lunged. It was an unstoppable force. The wounds, instead of debilitating it, seemed only to enrage it further. It moved with a terrifying, primal energy, an ancient, malevolent force unleashed. One by one, my remaining comrades fell. Walters, trying to reload, was swatted aside like a fly, his body sent hurtling against the rock face with a sickening crunch. Anderson, screaming, tried to flank it, but the gugway moved with a terrifying agility, turning its head, jaws snapping. His cries were brief, choked. I watched, frozen, a helpless spectator to the massacre of my unit. My rifle was empty, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight, to do anything, but my body was paralyzed, locked in a terrifying trance of witnessing utter annihilation. The roar, the screams, the sickening sounds of flesh tearing and bones breaking, it all merged into a symphony of absolute horror. Thorne, ever the iron-willed captain, was still fighting. He pulled out his sidearm, a small pistol against a titan, and emptied it point-blank into the creature's head. The rounds barely seemed to scratch its skull. The gugway turned on him, its yellow eyes blazing with an almost personal vendetta. Thorne stood his ground, a defiant silhouette against the raging horror, before it ripped him from his feet with a single, brutal swipe. He didn't scream, just a guttural roar of defiance that ended abruptly, swallowed by the creature's fury. Then there was only one. Me. My rifle lay uselessly at my feet. Around me lay the broken, scattered remains of my unit, my brothers in arms, now just blood and bone on the snow. The gugway stood amidst the carnage, its matted fur still smoking, its black blood sizzling, its yellow eyes burning with an unholy intensity. It was battered, wounded, but undefeated, and it was looking directly at me. Its gaze, unnervingly intelligent, was fixed on me, a deep, knowing intensity that pierced through my very being. It wasn't just seeing me. It was assessing me, calculating my fate. The smell of decay, iron, and burnt flesh was almost overwhelming now, a suffocating shroud. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, facing down an ancient, unyielding fury that had just wiped out 11 hardened soldiers without breaking stride. My life, my very existence, hung by a thread, caught in the burning, predatory gaze of the gugway. The hunt was over, and I was the last prey. The gugway's yellow eyes, blazing with an almost contemptuous intelligence, were fixed on me, I was the last one, the sole survivor of a massacre, standing amidst the gruesome remains of my unit. My rifle, empty and useless, lay in the snow. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped me, but something else, something primal and desperate, surged through my veins. It wasn't bravery. It was pure, unadulterated animal instinct. Survive. Run. My legs, numb from cold and terror, found their strength. I turned and ran, not with any plan, not with any destination in mind, just a desperate, frantic scramble for survival. The cold wind howled around me, but it felt like the creature's breath on my neck. My boots crunched through the snow, each step a frantic beat in the drum solo of my panic. My memory of the next few minutes or hours is a fragmented blur, a kaleidoscope of terror and desperation. The valley of screams was behind me, but the screams still echoed in my ears. I remember the inferno of snow and blood. The grotesque images of my fallen comrades burned into my mind. I remember the sounds of something pursuing me, the heavy thud of impossibly large feet hitting the snow, the guttural snorts, the rustle of matted fur. It was relentless, an unstoppable force closing in. I plunged into the dense skeletal trees, hoping the cramped passages would slow it down, give me a chance. Branches whipped at my face, tearing at my skin. I stumbled, fell, scrambling back up, pushing, every muscle screaming in protest. The cold was a dull ache now, overridden by the burning in my lungs, the frantic pulse in my ears. I ran until my legs felt like lead, until my chest was on fire, until I thought my heart would explode. I ran not for glory, not for my country, but for the raw, desperate, pathetic will to simply not die. The details are hazy. I remember flashes, the vast, indifferent expanse of white, the jagged silhouette of a mountain against a bruised sky, the faint, sickening stench that still clung to me, a constant reminder of what hunted me. I remember thinking, with a terrifying clarity, that it wasn't trying to catch me quickly. It was playing. It was enjoying the chase, savoring my terror. It was letting me run. Eventually, my body simply gave out. My legs buckled beneath me, and I collapsed face first into a deep drift of snow. Exhaustion, shock, and the crushing weight of everything I had witnessed all converged. The world spun, then dissolved into darkness. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been minutes, hours, maybe even a full day. When I finally dragged myself back to consciousness, it was to a world that was eerily, profoundly silent. The cold was still there, but it felt different now, an absence of the malevolent presence that had haunted my every step. I was alone, utterly, terribly alone. I was covered in snow, my clothes stiff with ice and something else, a dark, sticky substance that I knew with a sickening certainty was blood. Not all of it was mine. I stared at my hands, shaking uncontrollably, raw and scraped. The silence pressed in, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The screams had faded, the growls were gone. Only the biting wind, a mournful lament, whispered through the desolate landscape. My mind was a jumbled mess of fragmented images, a terrifying montage of horror. Martinez, Miller, Brooks, Thorne, all gone, all dead, and I was the only one left. The weight of that realization was crushing. I had escaped somehow, miraculously. But at what cost? What parts of me had I left behind in that valley of screams? Then, cutting through the vast, empty silence, a sound. Faint at first, a distant thrum growing steadily louder. It was the rhythmic chop-chop-chop of rotor blades, a helicopter, a rescue, a lifeline from the world I thought I'd lost, a fragile promise of escape, of warmth, of a return to sanity. But it was also a stark, chilling reminder of the unspeakable horror I was leaving behind, a secret burden that would weigh on my soul forever. The sound filled me with a desperate hope, but also a profound, sickening dread. I was being rescued, yes. But I knew with every fiber of my being that the nightmare wasn't over. It had simply receded, waiting for its next act. Days later, The rotors of the rescue helicopter lifted me out of that frozen hell. I was a ghost, a survivor by pure, inexplicable chance. The crew, a couple of young Coast Guard pilots, looked at me with a mixture of pity and bewildered shock. My face was gaunt, frostbitten, my eyes wide and haunted. I was covered in grime, blood, and a stench that no amount of scrubbing would ever truly remove. They didn't ask questions, not directly. They just got me to the nearest medical facility, a small makeshift clinic attached to an Air Force base hundreds of miles from the nightmare. The official story, as it filtered down through hushed conversations and carefully worded reports, was boilerplate bureaucratic tragedy. Avalanche in the Alaskan interior. Operation accident. Loss of life. No mention of 12 highly trained Special Forces operators. No mention of a creature that defied imagination. Just a tragic natural disaster. My comrades, my brothers in arms, were gone. Erased from the official record, their deaths whitewashed into a convenient lie. Nobody mentioned the GUGWE. Nobody ever would. I went through the motions. Debriefings where I carefully crafted my narrative, sticking to the official story, omitting the impossible truth. Therapy sessions where I learned to articulate the trauma of an avalanche without ever speaking the monster's name. They diagnosed me with extreme PTSD, survivor's guilt, all the standard psychological labels. And they were right, to an extent. The trauma was real. The guilt was suffocating. But it was a guilt born not just of survival, but of carrying a secret so profound, so terrifying, that it felt like a betrayal to the entire human race. I returned to civilization, to the lower 48, to a life that felt utterly alien. The sounds of everyday life, traffic, laughter, music, were jarring, almost painful, after the crushing silence of Alaska. I tried to reintegrate, to pretend that the world was normal, that monsters didn't exist. But the wilderness of Alaska, or rather the memory of what lurked within it, clung to me like a second skin. Every night, it came back. Not just in dreams, though those were a relentless parade of screams, fire, and the stench of decay. It was in the silence of my apartment, in the smell of pine in a room freshener, in the way a shadow would fall just right, triggering a visceral wave of terror. I'd close my eyes and I'd see them, those yellow eyes, burning, intelligent, unblinking. And always, always the putrid stench of rotting meat and rusted iron would invade my senses, as vivid and sickening as if the creature itself was standing right next to me. The most insidious torment wasn't just the memory of the horror, but the unsettling question that gnawed at me constantly. Why me? Why was I the only one who survived? Thorne, Miller, Brooks, Garcia, Jensen, Johnson, Walters, Anderson, Martinez, all gone, all dead. And I was left. The more I thought about it, the more horrifying the answer became. I wasn't rescued because I outsmarted it. I didn't escape because I was stronger or faster. I escaped because it let me. It allowed me to live. The thought chilled me to my core, a terrifying game of cat and mouse that wasn't over, merely paused. Those yellow eyes, full of intelligence and malice, had looked at me not with the intent to kill, but with something far more insidious, calculation, a perverse mercy, as if to say, go. Tell your kind what awaits. Go and spread the fear. I was a messenger, a living testament to its existence, forever marked by its touch. It was still out there, in the frozen expanse, and I carried a piece of it, a permanent haunting, a lie that lingered and festered in my soul. I was free, yes, but I was not truly free. I was merely on a longer leash, waiting. The lie, that insidious whisper of an avalanche, was meant to bury the truth, to contain the horror in a neat official package. But some truths refuse to stay buried. They claw their way out, festering in the dark corners of the mind, whispering of things that should not be. For me, that whisper became a roar, an echo of the monstrous sound that vibrated through the Alaskan valley. The GUGWE had left me alive, a survivor, yes, But it had also left me with a final, devastating revelation. It was days after my extraction, when I was still in that haze of shock and medication, trying to piece together the fractured memories, that I stumbled upon it. My gear miraculously had been recovered, deemed evidence of the operational accident. As I sifted through the wreckage of my life, my hands shaking, I found Thorne's tactical radio, somehow still functional, buried deep in my pack. It was damaged, crackling with static, but the last few seconds of its recording had somehow survived. I pressed play, my fingers fumbling. The sound was distorted, muffled, but undeniably Thorne's voice, raspy with pain, laced with a desperation I had never heard from him. The sounds of chaos, of battle, of screaming filled the background, and then, his voice cutting through the static, a chilling final declaration. Specimen is not unique. I repeat, not the only one. The words hit me like a physical blow, worse than any claw or bullet. Not unique, not the only one. The implication shattered everything I thought I knew, everything I clung to about that mission, that nightmare. We hadn't been sent to hunt a monster. We had been sent to hunt a monster from a family of monsters. The GUGWE wasn't an anomaly, a solitary aberration. It was a species, a terrifying, intelligent, predatory species. My blood ran cold, colder than any Alaskan winter. The fear I had felt in that valley was nothing compared to this. This was existential dread. Humanity was not just unprepared. We were utterly, terrifyingly vulnerable. Alaska wasn't just its territory. It was a breeding ground, a hidden world teeming with these things, lurking in the shadows, patiently waiting. Since then, every winter is a new torment. When the wind howls like a banshee, it sounds like the gugway's roar. When the night stretches, long and endless, the darkness feels alive, heavy with unseen eyes. I feel it, you see, that chilling sensation of being watched from the periphery, from the impenetrable gloom just beyond the reach of human understanding. It's not just paranoia, it's a certainty. Alaska never stopped being their territory. We just shared it for a while. And we, the men sent there, the brave, hardened soldiers, the supposed hunters, we were never hunters. We were always the prey. I was merely allowed to escape, a live specimen, a warning. But who am I warning? Who would believe me? The official narrative is too powerful, too comforting, so I live with it. The smell, the eyes, the screams, the chilling echo of Thorne's last words. I walk through my life, a ghost haunted by a truth too terrible to utter. Every shadow, every sound, every flicker of movement reminds me. They are still out there, waiting. And I, Sergeant Alex Mac McMillan, the lone survivor, the man who saw the unseeable, am merely waiting for the day they decide to play again. Because the hunt, I realize now, never truly ended. It just shifted, and I am still, forever, being hunted. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. Drop a comment below and tell us what chilled you the most, and definitely leave a like if you felt the cold breath of the GUGWE. And let us know, from which city or country are you watching this video? Your support helps us bring more chilling tales to life.